What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today is episode 2 of the BMW rebuild. It's probably only going to be a 2 or 3 episode series. Pretty quick and simple. So today what I need to do is take everything off the old motor that we're going to be running on the new motor, like the center diff, stuff like that. And then I also have a new timing chain kit for the new one because we don't want to have that happen again where a guide fails or the tensioner fails and you lose another motor. So we got a new timing chain kit for that. We got new oil pan seals, rear main seal, little stuff like that to make sure, you know, we're putting the car back together as good as we really can with the new engine that we have. So I already have the old engine in the stand, so we got to pull off this center diff and this little guy on this side, and then we'll attach that onto the new one. We got to, what else do we have to pull off? I think I might use this flywheel. I'm not sure why I put it in the stand with that on there. Should have took it off prior, but either way, once we get this off, we'll pull off that flywheel and run that. And last thing I might use, I may or may not use this starter. We know that one works, but it does look really crusty, so I might go ahead and just hope that the one on the new engine works, and we'll run with it. Got the new engine back in the stand. What we need to do now is just start tearing everything off the top because we're going to be doing new valve cover gaskets. We're going to be doing new timing chain, guides, tensioner, timing chain seal, you name it. We're pretty much replacing all the seals on the outside of the block itself. So it looks like these are top feed injectors. So what I'm hoping to do is just be able to pull these little hard lines off for the rail, pull the rail off, and then hopefully we can get the valve cover up and off without pulling all the injectors out. We'll obviously pull the coils off, and then, yeah, it just looks like a bunch of bolts around the valve cover. Nothing too crazy. And then when we get to the front end, we're gonna have to pull the balancer off, pull all these hoses off, and hopefully we'll be able to take that little timing cover off without too much of a hassle.
my
All right, little update. I finally got this hose out of that hole, as you can see, but I did have to break it apart in order to get it out. It was so corroded in there, and even once I pulled the O-ring off the side of it, it was still super corroded and stuck. But I did get it out, and the only reason I had to take that out, I didn't want to. Whoever pulled this engine out of the car at the junkyard broke that off. So obviously I can't use this plastic piece, so I had to pull it out of the car, and you can see it just broke apart. It was so corroded. You can see here on the bench, all the pieces, pretty hammered. Now, I do still have the O-ring, so I can kind of mock up sizes on a new one. Unfortunately, I don't have any at the house, so we gotta go pick some up. But now what I'm thinking is I have obviously a good hose on this car, but I think what I'm gonna do is strip this one all the way down as well, and we're just gonna use the timing cover on this car. That way I don't have to risk, one, breaking that hose out of there, like I had to do on the other block, and also this one is a little bit scored up from where I had to break the plastic apart. So I don't wanna risk taking this one out, slapping it in this engine, and then the O-ring leaks because it's too scored. So I think it's a little bit more work, but I think our best bet is to break the valve cover, timing cover off of this engine as well, and we'll just swap it over. I'll just leave the hose on, and I think that's our safest option. I don't really feel like waiting on more parts to come in and then potential leaks anyways. Let's just be safe. We'll swap them over, and we should be good. In the meantime, we'll continue breaking this engine down, get the new timing chain guides, get everything timed up, and then off camera, I'll just go ahead, break that engine down, and we'll get it swapped over. Well, didn't expect that oil pan to come off like that. We got a mess. Oh, fantastic. I'm gonna go get cleaned up. All right, as I'm starting to get cleaned up here, I did not expect that pan to come off like it did. Most pans are RTV'd on, so you really gotta pry them down and you kind of just work its way out. This one, as soon as I stuck that little crowbar thing in there, it just dropped to the ground, and that'll happen. So now I know. That's definitely a gasketed oil pan, no RTV, so once that gasket broke free, that was it. Now, I'm looking at this block because I was going to take the timing cover off the old engine down there. Most of these engines that I've worked on, I guess the N20s are different, but normally you can take that timing cover off. This one, after I'm digging so far deep into it, I'm realizing that whole front timing cover is actually part of the block by the looks of it. So I can't actually take that off, which means the only thing we can hope is that I can pull that other radiator hose out of the old block and hopefully it seals on this cover because it's not replaceable apparently. So that kind of really sucks, but what are you gonna do? So that's all we can try. Hopefully it seals. Hopefully we won't have any issues. But right now we're really close to being able to pull out the old timing components. But I do need to get that jig, which should be here tomorrow. Once that gets here, we'll be able to lock the cams in place once the engine's in top dead center. And then we can pull the old timing components out, get the new stuff in, time it, and then we can start reassembly. Waiting for tomorrow. Hopefully Amazon brings that jig kit on a Sunday. That would be ideal. So far, so good, so we'll see. As you can see back here, I thought that was a seam for the timing cover, but it's actually all one piece with the engine block, which really sucks, because down here it's RTV'd, but that's just for the cradle, holding the crank in place. So, kind of out of luck. It's not too bad in there, so I'm hoping we'll be fine, but yeah, we're gonna have to send it. Alrighty, it's the next morning now. I've gone ahead and knocked out a few things on this engine before I picked up the camera. One, you might notice we took the wastegate actuator thing off here because this is actually our tensioner for our timing chain. So once we remove the timing chain, we're going to replace that tensioner, so the big actuator had to come off. We also took that off because the one that was on the car, if you look here, has a broken connector. And I didn't want to risk running that and, you know, ruining it with whatever liquids might get in there. So I popped the old one off the old engine, and the connector's still good. So we're going to be running that guy. I've also come over to our old engine, and I was able to get this coolant line out of here without breaking it. It was still very, very tough and corroded, but I just took my time, pried a little bit at a time. And over here, you can see still all in one piece. And we got the little tab over here, also not broken. I also got a new O-ring on there, so this should be good to reinstall. Now, while we're speaking of O-rings, these are our center diff pieces. And you can see there's a little O-ring on each one where it goes into the oil pan. I don't have O-rings to fit that here. I don't have any in my kit that are that thin. But I'm gonna call BMW tomorrow and see if they have any of those in stock somewhere near me. And maybe we can pick some up so we can get this together. But for the most part, I have O-rings to fit any coolant line or anything like that in this kit here. Now lastly, I've gone ahead and put the flywheel back on, or flex plate. I know on automatic cars it's called a flex plate, manual cars is a flywheel. We got that back on for the reason of timing this car. These engines, you can see there's a little hole right there on the flex plate. Now there are a few holes around the flex plate, so you gotta be careful. This one's got a little dimple in it, and I know this is our top dead center hole. So essentially in the timing kit that'll be coming in today, we have a pin. And that pin, let me get the flashlight on here. You can see there's that little black plug going through the back of the engine where it would connect to the bell housing. That plug goes through, and essentially we're gonna put a pin all the way through the block, and it's gonna go through that little hole on the flywheel, and that's how you know this engine is in top dead center. Another way you can tell, if you look at our exhaust cam, if this will focus, you can see there's that little barcode on top of the cam. Same thing with our intake cam. You got that little barcode on top. If those barcodes are on top, that means you're most likely really close to top dead center, and once you get that pin in, you'll know you're in there for sure. If you don't see those barcodes anywhere, either you're way out of time, or you're not yet in top dead center. I haven't removed the timing components yet because I want to get these cams locked so we can remove it. But the way you would do that, essentially, there's a few bolts throughout our guides, and then we got one plug here that's gonna be able to get the bolt out right there. And then I'm assuming that this plug and this plug that are gonna sit behind your balancer, you gotta pull those out to get to two more bolts on the guides. And then you got your oil pump guides down here, your oil pump tensioner, and then like I said, the timing chain tensioner is this big bolt right here. And to show you guys what I mean by that, in this little box, you can see it's a replacement bolt, and then you got your tensioner on this side. Essentially that's just, you can squeeze that in and out, and that'll tension up your chain. And then also in this box, you see we have our new main guide, and then the top guide that goes between the cam gears. And hopefully with all this, we won't have a timing issue on these motors, and that's what these are notorious for. We believe that's what happened to that engine there, and it's happened to quite a few of my Audis in the past. So yeah, definitely want to keep an eye on your timing chain, make sure that's not loosening up on you. A couple hours later, we got this jig set up for the cams, came in the mail. So this tool right here is actually our pin to get this thing in top dead center. So like I was saying earlier, this little black pin will come out of there, and you'll put this aluminum or whatever this is made out of. You'll slap this guy in there, and it'll go through this little hole in your flex plate, and that's how you know you're in top dead center. So now that that little plastic plug is out, we can go ahead and push this one in, and you can see we just have to turn the crank over just a little bit and make sure this goes straight through that hole. And now you can clearly see it's all the way through our flex plate. We also have both of the QR codes on top of the cam gears. So now we can go ahead and get this jig set up. Now I'm just going to take this Vanos tool, and essentially we're not going to bolt it down. I'm just going to make sure this fits. And as you can see, it has the two little dowels in it, which should align in our dowel hole there and our hole there on our cam adjusters. So when you slide this in, that's how you know you're in top dead center if these line up. If they don't line up, it means you're probably out of time. So yeah, I'll definitely have to correct timing if that's the case. But since this fits right in, we'll know it'll be good. We'll have to just put it back to these exact positions and we'll know that the engine will be in time, at least for the cams. So we can slap this back in the case. We're gonna be using that later. Now it's time to remove this crank bolt. Now this thing is torqued to some ridiculous amount, and it's really tricky to get when the motor's not in the car, because on the stand, you know, you can only push so much before it just wants to tilt the stand over. So back here, this tool here is not strong enough to hold the amount of torque. It would just bend that tool. So what I kind of rigged together is this flywheel lock tool. This is actually a Company 23 tool for an EJ25 motor on the Subarus. I was able to kind of rig it into this system to lock the flywheel. We'll see if it works. If it doesn't hold, we'll have to figure something else out. But what we have to try to do is get a breaker bar on that. I'm gonna have Seth come out, kind of hold the stand and the engine all together, and hopefully we can break that thing free so we can eventually pull the chain out. All right, that wasn't too bad. Videos hyped it up to be a lot harder than it was. I've had Subaru ones tighter than that, to be honest. But there you have it. There's your crank bolt. Now these are one-time use. You can actually see where the threads are stretched right there. So you do not want to rerun the same one because they are torqued to quite a big amount. And to show you guys what I did, because I didn't really trust these holes to hold our flywheel locker, I actually took, I believe that's a bolt off the strut brace, and it was short enough that I could bring it in here and pinch this tool nice and tight. And yeah, that thing ain't going nowhere. And just to show you guys, this tool is still loose, so we didn't put any pressure on that, and all worked out well. Now we can go ahead and remove our cam sensors on each side. I believe it's just an E8, so an inverted Torx E8, and we can pull those out. And that way we're not gonna risk breaking them when we pull our cam gears out. Now that we have the cam sensors out, we're gonna go ahead and take off this nice big 24 mil bolt here. This is actually the timing chain tensioner. You'll see when I pull it out, it essentially tightens up against the guide. So go ahead and pull this out. It's probably gonna be filled with oil behind it, so we'll just hold on to a rag, make sure we're not making a mess, and yeah, should be easy. Now what we're gonna do is take off these cam gears. So these are just 24 millimeter nuts, and we're just gonna break them free. Now it is important that when you take these off, you know which side goes where. Obviously this side is intake, this side is exhaust. I have the little adjusters labeled E and I, and the cam gears themselves are actually labeled EX, as you can see right there, and intake, as you can see right there. So when those come off, make sure you know which cam they go to. That's very important. I just went ahead and pulled out the little, I don't even know what you'd call it, little crank extension shaft thing that the balancer sits on. Essentially, just put two of the little bolts that hold the pulley on and just wiggle it out nice and easy. So now that's out. Now what we got to do is remove this plug, that plug, and that plug, and then all the bolts holding the little guides on. And essentially that will make our whole timing assembly free, and we'll be able to pull all the guides and the chain out all at once. And just like that, all of our timing components are now out of the engine. You can see cam gear's gone, all of our timing chain guides, everything is gone, and we are ready to refresh it with some new stuff. Now, I'm looking at these cams coming from the Subaru world, and I'm like mesmerized how these things actually spin. Like, it's all press fit. There's no dowels, there's no key, there's no nothing. Like, the cam gears just sit on there, and whatever the torque is on cam gear bolts is how these things spin, I guess, because yeah, it's not hooking on to anything. Same thing down here. This whole shaft goes in and sits on the bottom ring, and all the power coming off the crank is literally just press fit, and that's what's spinning the entire motor. So that's kind of crazy. Now, being that this engine does have a balance shaft, that's what this is right here, and it is timed with your oil pump. So being that it is a balance shaft, it is timed, and when we take this all off, there's a good chance that that thing gets out of time, but there is a fix to that. They do make a locking tool for the balance shaft, but unfortunately, I don't have it. So I'm hoping I can take this little bolt here and come into the bottom of the engine. There is a little hole right here. Now we can put this bolt up in there, and essentially what's gonna happen is I'm just gonna turn this little guy on the oil pump until this bolt sinks in there a little bit further, and that's how we know the balance shaft is in time. So let's grab, I think that's like a T60. We'll grab a T60, spin it on there, and yeah, once this bolt gets sucked up, we'll know we're in time. And just like that. Now you can see that our bolt clearly went up in there, and if we go to reverse this, which I don't really recommend, but you can see it grabs the bolt and it ain't gonna move any more than that. And I can actually just put pressure on it, bolt stays in there. So you can see, once it slots into that hole, you'll know it. So I'm just gonna center it out, drop the bolt back out, and we know that is in time now. Because I don't actually have the locking tool for that stays in that hole, essentially what we're gonna have to do when we reassemble timing is just double check that when we put everything in, make sure that's still in time, because if we assemble everything else and that's not in time and the balancing shaft isn't right, we might run into issues. So yeah, once we get timing chain, all that stuff in, we input that shaft, we'll do the same thing, put that little screw up there, make sure we're good, and should be dialed. While I have this disassembled, I'm going to remove this front seal, and we're gonna replace it with a new one. This one doesn't appear it was leaking too much, but while it's all apart, might as well slap it on so we don't have to have a headache down the road. So we should be able to just pull this out, and then I'll have to figure out how to get this one in here because I don't have the tool, but as long as we can get it in and get it even all the way around, we'll be good to go. And now we got our front main installed. As you can see, pretty even all the way around. That is the goal. Obviously, it's not gonna be 100% perfect without the tool, but as long as it's inset just a little bit, and I can obviously see the back of it, so I can see the lines and where the old one was, and this one is pretty much perfectly lined up. So I'm happy with that. The way I did it, I took the Company 23 rear main seal installer for Subarus, spun it backwards, got it tapped in flush, and then came over here, don't mind the mess, grabbed the old front main seal, flipped it backwards, and I just tapped it in the rest of the way with this. And yeah, works just fine. So now we got a new front main seal. We don't have to worry about it leaking. So you can see we got our old timing chain components on the ground down there, nice on rags. Everything is organized. So we have our intake cam, exhaust cam gear, our little shaft, and then all of our plugs with their respective pins and bolts. Now coming over here, this table might look disgusting, but I promise it's clean. This is our new timing chain and guides and our little pulley. So this is all assembled how it's supposed to go. So this is actually ready to be dropped back down into this car, or into this engine. So we're just gonna take this whole unit all as one, get it dropped in, get these two bolts in, and then we can start working on getting our guides bolted up and get this shaft in down below. Now that we got all the timing components in, we got our pins in and the bolts to hold all the guides, I'm gonna go ahead and slap the cam gears back in. And like I said, make sure that you're putting the exhaust on the exhaust cam, intake on the intake cam. That's pretty important. So let's get those on, and then we'll be just left with the shaft on the bottom. And now our new timing system is all installed. We got our cam gears in, we got this bottom little shaft put in, all our bolts and pins are in, and now this engine's ready to be tightened down. We'll time it, tension it, and we should be good. Now the one thing I spaced was this bolt. We're not gonna reuse this because the threads get stretched out. So I gotta pick up a new one at BMW. Hopefully they have one somewhat local to me. If not, we'll have to get one on order. But I'm not gonna put this one back in. I did just go ahead and check our balance shaft. We're still perfectly in time, so all good there. These guys, we can't really time these until we get everything tightened down, so yeah, we're kind of stuck. I'll pick up this video once we get that new bolt. Okay, it is now a day later, and you can see here we got a new crank bolt and 2 new O-rings for the center diff. So now we can go ahead, essentially get this engine 100% ready to drop in the car. So I hope. First thing we're gonna do is get our cam adjusters timed. So we're gonna take this little jig here, and essentially we're gonna line these little dowels up with the holes on these guys, and then we'll tighten down these 24mm bolts, and then yeah, essentially our cams will be timed. These bolts will go to 55 Newton meters plus 55 degrees. So whatever that adds up to be, we're just gonna be using our little torque wrench, and then pretty much just half a 90, a little bit more than half a 90. Now what I'm gonna do is insert this tool into the hole where our tensioner would go. And essentially what this is going to do is just temporarily tension the chain before we put the tensioner in, so we can get the rest of the timing set, and then we'll install the tensioner afterwards. Now we can go ahead and install our big boy bolt into the crank. So this is going to go to 100 newton meters and then 270 degrees. So this guy gets relatively tight.
Marvin Divine. I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming, it's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.
I know that I gotta stay away from all your games.
Alright, we got that bad boy tight. She was pretty tight, huh?
So tight.
Thanks to Seth coming and helping me, because when I was trying to move this, essentially it's so much torque that it just wants to tip the stand over. So he came kind of help the stand while I pumped the hell out of that freaking breaker bar. So now we just got to essentially get the plugs back in front of the timing cover, get our cam sensors back in, and we'll go from there. Now that we have all the plugs, the cam sensors, the pulley, everything back on, we can now go ahead, we'll remove this jig off the cams, and then we're actually gonna go ahead and remove our flywheel locker, pull the pin out of our flywheel, and now, because I can't actually spin my engine over with this flex plate, flywheel, whatever you wanna call it, in here, I actually have to pull the engine off. We'll take the flywheel back off, and then put the engine back on the stand, and that way I have enough room back there to spin the engine. What we're gonna do is obviously spin this all over, and we'll make some marks on the cam gears. We're gonna spin it over a couple rotations, make sure everything stays in time. If it does, then we're essentially ready to put this all back together. I've saved you some time, and I went ahead, did this off camera, got the flex plate removed, so now we have a bunch of room back there to spin this over. I've also gone ahead and I made some marks. So we got our cam sensor mark, and then I've gone ahead and marked the crank pulley as well. And then down here, I know it's a little hard to see, but I did go ahead and mark the little gear there to make sure that our balance shaft is in time. Typically you would mark the flywheel as well, but these marks will do just fine because I don't have the flex plate on here. So let's go ahead. We're gonna spin this over 2 times. Spinning this over 2 times will hopefully get our cams lined right back up where they were. And then we can do the same thing, check the balance shaft, make sure, you know, that our screw hole or our little hole on the bottom of where the pan would sit is still in time. And if that's all good, yeah, we are dialed.
The sun. To dream, believe.
So that was 2 spins. And you can see that our marks there line up, our marks there line up, our mark on the crank lines up, and the mark down here lines up perfect. And I also just went ahead, took the screw, put it up in the balance shaft, and fits right in there. So we are good on timing. That's a big relief. I've never timed one of these engines before, so a little bit different. This is all press fit, so yeah, definitely interesting. But now we're good to essentially put the rest of this back together. We have to remove our little timing tensioner and put our actual tensioner in. Now this you want to be very careful with. When we unthread this, you want to keep tension on the chain. That way it doesn't jump time. What I might do is put the jig back on here just to be safe. And then we're just gonna take this out. I'll probably put my finger in here on the little guide, and then we'll thread the tensioner back in and torque that down. But definitely want to be careful that, you know, you don't loosen it up enough where it wants to jump a tooth or anything like that. Now that we have the tensioner back in, I'm gonna give it 2 more spins, make sure everything's still in time, and then we'll just cue do a montage of getting this thing all back together.
Superhero. Crashing down all around this empty town. I'm searching for the lost and found, but you don't care, you're unaware. Keep moving like the scars aren't even there. It's in the air like a blazing flare. Don't stare 'cause the flames will burn us. I thought you were the one for me, that's why I gave you everything. You close by the stormy seas. Oh, you meant the world to me. I used to kiss your head when you cried for me. Hold your hand while the pain was over. Keep you warm by the roaring sea. You meant the world to me. Like shadows in the atmosphere, charting the stratosphere. Yeah. I prayed for you and kept you near in hopes you'd chase away my fears. I'm on my own. You made it so.
We made some solid progress tonight. The only things we have left to do before this is ready to drop in is get motor mounts on, oil pan on, get our new rear main seal on, get the flex plate back on, and really just button up anything else that we can before we get it in the car. But for the most part, this thing is pretty much ready. We did do new valve cover gaskets, O-rings, front and rear main seal, oil pan gasket. Pretty much everything is refreshed on top of the timing chain. So hopefully we won't have any issues, no leaks once we get this in the car, but whatever we find, we'll narrow it down in the car. This thing is almost done. We're gonna finish buttoning it up tomorrow. For now, I'm gonna get the shop cleaned up and we'll pick up tomorrow. Moving on to the final day of getting this engine ready to go in the car. We got our oil pan and our new oil pan gasket. This thing is 100% ready to get slapped on. I already went ahead and cleaned off the gasket surface on the block and the pan. We got the new gasket there and all of our bolts on that rag. So let's go ahead, get that slapped up there, and then we'll move on to whatever else we got left.
No point in blaming you, did not know. Oh, I thought you were the one for me. That's why I give you everything. Held you close by the stormy seas. Oh, you meant the world to me.
Well, this engine is 100% ready to drop back into the car. Obviously, we didn't put on the driver's side motor mount because we need to fit it next to the steering column and it doesn't fit with that motor mount on. We did get the passenger one on because that doesn't bind up with anything. We got the center diff back together. We got the rear main seal installed. You guys kind of saw that in a little montage. And yeah, everything is wrapped up and as far as we can get on the engine block alone. So maybe this coming weekend we'll get this thing dropped back in the car, but that's pretty much it for timing this thing. I know this video is pretty dang long, so I apologize, and I know it's not our typical Hatch STI or Evo content, but hopefully this can help someone. Maybe some of you guys are gonna work on one of these Euro cars eventually. N20 motor is pretty common, so you never know, but hope you guys enjoyed. I'm gonna wrap this one up here. I'll catch you in the next one, but until then, peace out. See y'all later.